I'm curious as to where our conversation is going to go. First of all, I think there's a big absence of initiation, so to speak, from adolescence into adulthood. It was not okay for me not to do it. I can be authentically myself whilst belonging at the same time. So, well, that's a different avenue to your DJing. And I'm like, do you know what? Not really.
What does it mean to build community, and how does one go about that?
A pivotal or an initiatory experience. We can tend to each other's wounds in a way that when you're on your own, that's not possible, which is why community is so important.
What is the point of therapy?
Good question. When you do your work, you're in service to certainly to the future generations, but also to the past generations. Don't equate therapists to maybe like mechanics or chefs.
What's been your toughest gig, Nick? Welcome. Good to see you. Thanks for showing up. I know we spoke a couple of months ago, and I sort of voiced the idea, I'm going to start a podcast. And somehow we got to the conversation. I said, are you interested? Well, you said to me, you're looking for people to come on it. I said, yeah, and we sort of struck a deal that that you would be my first guest. So here we are. That's been gestating for a while, and I'm really glad that they've accepted the invite to be here. So what's it like to be here today?
Well, thanks for the invitation, James. What's it like to be here? I'm curious. It's good to see the setup. It's good to. I'm curious as to where our conversation is going to go. I'm open. I'm feeling open and ready, and kind of. I guess my mind is fairly clear and kind of blank in a good way. Yeah.
So what are you clear about?
It's more of a state of mind than it's the absence of thinking. So a sense of clarity, a sense of space. Yeah.
And what did you have to do? I mean, because that sounds like quite simple, but I imagine for some people that's quite like a difficult sort of state to attain. So what have you done, or how did you get to be able to sort of inhabit a space of as described?
Yeah, that's a good question. I guess there's several factors. One is, I think, a good grounding in meditation, transcendental meditation, which I used to do a lot in the 90s, which kind of sowed a seed for a capacity to rest the mind. And although I don't practice meditation these days, it's still with me. And when required, I guess there's an element of self-regulation, a capacity to listen, which I've developed over the years. There's a stillness, not always by any stretch, but when on the way here when I was driving, I thought, I wonder what we're going to talk about. I wonder how this is going to go. And I thought, let go of all of that. Let it go and just show up, listen, pay attention, and see what happens.
So is that your go-to, is to sort of think about things, or to sort of try and understand like what's going to happen next? And is that like a new thing for you, being able to sort of let go of that? And
I feel I'm orientated right now. I've known you for some years.
Yep.
I've been to your house many times. I'm used to wearing headphones. I am orientated, and when I'm orientated, I can regulate myself more easily. Whereas if I'm not orientated, if I didn't know you and I was somewhere else, there'd be more activity trying to orientate, basically make sense of my surroundings, and so I feel quite comfortable almost straight away.
Yeah, okay. And I've never heard you use that term orientated to describe like how you are or where you're at. Could you say some more about that?
Um, I guess I think orientation is a word that I enjoy the word. It makes a lot of sense to me, and it's something about being in a time and place that I get a sense of a compass point, kind of in the middle, where I'm orientation, where I'm not too over one way or too over another way, and to some extent settled and balanced.
Okay, no, thanks for explaining. And that sounds, if I've heard you correctly, that sounds something a bit like finding the middle or a center, and sort of knowing where you are and being able to look around and navigate your world and yourself within it, or something like that.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I practice transactional analysis, and which is a therapeutic modality, TA for short, and TA is all about finding that. In TA, we refer to it as adult, a sense of okayness, which is very much, again, this orientation, this kind of point of, I have a fairly good idea of who I am. I have a fairly good idea of right now of who you are, what's around me. So yeah, there's a sense of I'm okay, you're okay, we're okay, the world is okay right now.
Yeah, gotcha. Yeah. So who are you, Nick? If you were to, you speak about you having a sense of who you are.
Who am I? I mean, that's a deep question.
Yeah. Where do you want to start?
Who am I?
If you're willing, I get, there might be parts that you're perhaps unwilling or not quite comfortable in sharing. So, just want to let you know, just share those bits of you which you, perhaps not feel comfortable with, but that you want to actually share with us today, because I'm really happy for you to feel a level of uncomfortableness in what you're sharing. And I'll leave it to you to decide, what you share.
It's a deep question. It's a wide question. And I guess perhaps at this point, I find myself becoming slightly disorientated. It's a vast map. Who am I? It's a wide map, and it's a deep map. I could tell you that, my name's Nick Carling. I live in Lewis. I'm 56 years old. And on a surface level, these things are markers of, orientating myself in the world. I don't have an answer to it right now.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you mentioned that, it's sort of a deep thing. Like, where do you stop with that? It's almost like a boundaryless sort of well of who I am.
Yeah.
And perhaps not. There'll be edges, I imagine, of where you're discovering who you are and what you know about yourself.
I would say that again, on a good day, I get a sense of who I am.
Yeah.
I know who I am. However, articulating that is something else.
Okay. Yeah. And my guess is that could change from time to time. That perhaps you've been different people throughout your life, and like right now, as you're showing up, we're friends. We volunteer together. We're both therapists.
Yes, many. I'm a believer in. I'm a believer in the capacity for change, and as you say, as I reflect back on my life, I've had many chapters. One could say lifetimes or different shades of myself, and I consider myself to be the same person throughout all of that. However, I've kind of shed skins and kind of inhabited different ways of being who I am.
Yeah. And are there any episodes of shedding skin that you sort of look back from where you are today and sort of identifying what the relevance of that skin shedding was, and what came of it? What did you get from it, or how is it playing into who Nick is, or part of who Nick is today?
I think, and this kind of ties back into the orientation, I think, and I've been considering this more recently, this kind of balance or tension between an innate desire to belong in the world and an innate desire to be authentic in the world. And sometimes these two things there's a tension, because sometimes we sacrifice some authenticity in order to belong, or sometimes, if we prioritize our authenticity, there might be some loneliness or some, sense of not belonging. So that's been an ongoing thing for me in my life. And I think, as you refer to, you asked about shedding skins, and I could refer back to when I first got involved with the Band of Brothers, and when I first did my rites of passage weekend initiation experience. That was the first real immersion I had, in a sense of I can be authentically myself whilst belonging at the same time. That both felt strong and comfortable. It was a new experience. It was not comfortable getting to that place, but there was a real kind of sense of balance of authenticity and a sense of belonging.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what was that like? I mean, you spoke earlier about that there can be like a trade-off between being authentic and belonging, and there needs to be some sort of trade-off. Could you just give us an example of what you mean, just sort of put that in concrete terms? So I get it sort of in an abstract sort of, concept, but...
Okay, so I could go back to my school days and, kind of talk about a sense of not really perhaps fitting in so much with a lot of my peers, and there being a sense of isolation, being younger and still really kind of formulating, my own sense of authenticity, but just knowing that wasn't me, but I had to belong, right? It was so that, I guess that's an example of where something is sacrificed in order to the trade-off.
Yeah, gotcha. Okay, so changing the behaviour of what you might say, how you might show up,
Yes,
especially around like younger peers in your teenage years.
Yes,
but a sacrifice of actually, there's more to me than meets the eye. I'm doing this so you accept me and don't shun me or take the piss out of me. Or
yeah, I think I can really relate to wanting to belong as a teenager, belong in various groups and various sort of phases of teens and maybe 20s, and a sense of, there's something, the word shame comes up for me. The sense of this authenticity requires being seen, it requires being witnessed, it requires taking risks, putting one's head above the parapet. There's a risk of rejection, alienation, ridicule, punishment, all these kind of things. And I think that, that it comes in, I think perhaps, in later life, there comes this, perhaps, I don't know, a sense of courage to be authentic, to be oneself, and actually a lot of the time, I think it can be, a lot of it can be illusory. It can be, it's not actually that real. It's like this, the fear of being rejected is bigger than the reality.
okay, so that which we imagine how things might pan out if we were to behave in a way which is more authentic. What you're saying is, oftentimes, I think that's what you're saying, when you actually get to it, it doesn't pan out as bad as it seems.
No, not at all.
Okay. Yeah. And you spoke about that taking some courage to be authentic, and you talked about the time when you joined a Band of Brothers, the charity we both volunteer for, and you went on your own initiatory rites of passage weekend. So what was that like? You talked about that being a significant time of when you shed a skin. I mean, from what I understand, these sort of things were meant to happen much earlier in our lives, and that way you would have been sort of mid-40s or late 40s when that happened. So it sort of sounds like a bit of catching up on something.
Yeah, very much so. I think that, well, first of all, I think there's a big absence of initiation, so to speak, from adolescence into adulthood. I think that, our culture and our societies, there's a significant deficit in supporting and holding young men into maturity. So I didn't really experience that. I had my own kind of strands of that, as it were, but very much kind of was navigating it on my own, trying to make sense of it and sort of blunder and stumble through the dark. And I kind of, like, A Band of Brothers was on my radar for a while. For a couple of years, I knew men that had done the Mankind Project, their initiatory weekend with the Mankind Project. I was aware of it, and I kind of deep down, Joseph Campbell talks about hearing the call. Deep down, I knew this was a thing, that it was important that I didn't. It was not okay for me not to do it. So I kind of, in a way, I kind of cajoled myself, and and I had a lot of fear. I had a lot of fear because I had a sense of what was coming, what the function of this was. Okay, so we talk about orientation. We talk about in rites of passage. One of the key elements of rites of passage is to lose that orientation. To surrender phones, to surrender keys, wallet, the known. And so for me, it was stepping into the unknown was disorientating, quite literally. And that was the risk for me.
Sounds like that was a big step for you to seeing that you've spent some time and commitment and practice to get to a place of orientation, and for that moment on your journey to sort of throw caution to the wind and let yourself enter a place where you were disorientated.
Yeah, it took a lot of trust. And, the people that I knew that had been involved in A Band of Brothers and the Mankind Project were close friends and people that I trusted. And, if they said, something was significant and have conversations around that, I believe them.
Yeah. And you spoke before about, I think the words you used were, it wasn't okay for me to say no. And I'm just getting this picture of you having an internal dialogue.
Yeah.
And I'm just, who were you having that with, or what part of you were you having that with? Who was saying, Nick, you got to go along now. There's no turning back.
Yeah. So there was the part of me that wanted to thrive, take risks, wanted to grow, wanted to fulfill or step towards my potential, further into my potential. That was the part of me that was, said it's not okay not to do this. And the part of me that was didn't want to do it was just like, look, keep your head down, keep your mouth shut, stay small. And so, yeah, there was this dialogue. I think it's a classic kind of dialogue that I imagine most people have, of this kind of this urge to grow and an urge to shrink, an urge to live and an urge to retreat from life.
Yeah. But it was something in there where you recognise I've got more to give, and was that what it was, and that's why I've got to go along, or was it? Or was it that you could be more? You said you talked about potential, and I know that can mean lots of different things. So I just wondered what it meant for you.
Yeah, I wanted to be in service. I'd always had this. So my kind of background before that, I worked a lot with people on the autistic spectrum. I was always quite community focused, and I wanted to do more of that, and I liked the idea. And really, in some respects, again, if we take it a bit deeper, I was stepping up to take care of that younger part of myself. Okay. That younger part of myself that needed initiating.
Right, a part of yourself that you've been carrying, sort of in an uninitiated state.
Yeah, and this is in hindsight now. I can kind of reflect back on it and say that I get a sense that was what was going on at the time. maybe it wasn't that clear. It wasn't that clear at the time, but yeah, this sense of this younger, it was I was kind of I was showing up for myself
Gotcha.
and for others in the process. It wasn't just about me, but it felt natural. It felt appropriate, despite the fact that it was, unnerving, unsettling, disorientating. It was all those things.
Sounds pretty powerful. Powerful experience. Yeah. How did that change things for you? What's changed since then?
Yeah.
And I guess the reason I ask is you talked about initiation at the beginning, and I was thinking, could I ask you, what's the point of initiation? So I thought before we go to a general, just sort of bring the focus onto you and what good did it do you? What was the point of it for you?
So rites of passage and initiation helped me to de-escalate and turn down my levels of shame. Something about it was about trusting, developing trust, developing the capacity to allow myself to be seen, and those enormous healing qualities.
I'm not just, as you're speaking, I'm just getting an image of you like turning the pages in the book of Nick and going, being ready to be seen.
Yes.
Trusting, next page and stuff like that. Yeah. And how has that changed things for you in your life? What's
It's been, I would say that I've said this before, that my rites of passage experience was possibly the single most profound experience of my life. So it was a turning point, or a catalyst, certainly, for an increased quality in relationship, in my personal relationship with my friends, relationship with myself. There was an increased sense of clarity. There was less noise. And this, took time, but the rites of passage was the catalyst. It changed the direction of my career.
Say some more.
Yeah. So I tell this story of doing mental training, working with Mark Nightingale, and it was at Leaf Hall in Eastbourne, and we do a model, soccer model, situation, outcome, choices, actions. So it's like a coaching kind of model that we use with a lot of our young men, and we would trying it out as older men doing our training, how to work with younger men. And Mark said, "Can I have a volunteer?" And I was like, "Yep." And he said, "Okay, what's your current situation?" And I said, "I'm tired of my current job. I've kind of got backache. My hearing's going." He kind of said, "What are your choices?" And I said, "I've always wanted to train as a therapist." And I kind of, a lot of my work was already sort of mentoring and really paying attention and listening. I was doing a lot of that. I recognised that I was good at that. It was something I enjoyed doing, and I wanted to do more of it, and I wanted to actually earn a living out of it. And so what actions are you willing to take? And also, I'm going to have a conversation with my partner. I'm going to do a bit of research into what kind of courses are around, and reach out and send some emails and make some phone calls. When are you willing to do that by? Okay, this time next week. All right, thank you. That was it. That just completely set something in motion that felt right, felt good. And I went on to train as a transactional analyst, which is now my primary part of my career.
Yeah, gotcha. It sounds like we're doing that coaching session with Mark, really able to sort of draw out, firm up, and I guess really ask you the question, like, when are you ready to do this?
Yeah, it was direct. and it was, and this is the nature of a lot of the mentoring work that we do. It was, it's direct work. It's clean and it's clear and it's compassionate, and it's directive. I just ask the questions: when are you willing to do that by? And listen to the answer.
Yeah, gotcha. Yeah. So you spoke about that this is now like your main activity in work wise.
Yeah, pretty much.
And I know you've got other hats. Is there anything like around what else that you do that you want to speak about?
So I volunteer with the Band of Brothers. Some of my work with the Band of Brothers is paid, but most 95% of it is voluntary, which is significant for me to do voluntary work. That's been a game changer in itself. So yeah, I've always been a music lover since I've been knee high to a grasshopper. I've collected records. So yeah, I've been DJing for about 25 years, and that's ongoing. So that's kind of one hat I wear. And to be fair, people have said to me, "Oh, that's the training as a psychotherapist. Well, that's a different avenue to your DJing." And I'm like, do you know what? Not really. It's about listening. It's about paying attention. It's about patterns. It's a creative process. There's elements of science. There's elements of creativity. There's elements of working with people. So it's an extension of that. And I know that might sound a bit odd. And I actually wrote in my dissertation, I wrote about it, about the parallels. So yeah, that's another hat that I wear.
So what you're speaking about there is like when you are DJing, you're looking out to the people who are in attendance, and you're watching them, and you're judging, you're listening, and you're making calls on that.
Absolutely,
with,
all the time.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
And do you have a regular gig in case there's anyone listening today who goes, "Oh, quite like to watch going to some of this"?
I'm on the radio in a Brighton radio station, 1BTN. I've been doing that for about 8 years.
When does that run?
So my show's on currently Fridays, 10 a.m. to midday, second Friday of the month. So yeah, do that. And in terms of kind of gigs, bits and pieces, I live in Lewes. I do stuff around Lewes. I used to, do a lot in London. I was very much busier then. I do a lot less now. But yeah, regular nights around Lewes, and I do a lot of private functions, and yeah.
Okay. And you spoke about the volunteering, and I think you mentioned that that was significant. And what's the significance of the volunteer work that you do?
I think the significance is one of the big things that has really kind of solidified itself for me in working with the Band of Brothers is the concept of being in service to my community, and doing something that is being in service to something bigger than myself. It's not about me.
Which is, so what is the bigger something?
Well, in a band of, I mean, for any individual, I'd say it's down to them. It's like something about giving freely of one's time and energy. And for me, it's mentoring young men in the criminal justice system through a Band of Brothers, community building, being an active part of community. Again, it's a sense of belonging whilst also being in service. It's a win-win, and and over the years, throughout 8 years, I've kind of woven my way through various phases of being in a Band of Brothers, and I'm also, I guess one of the things, again, you asked me earlier about, what's changed is my boundaries are a lot firmer. So even within a Band of Brothers, I can say yes or no, and be clean and clear on it. So yeah, being in service to something bigger than myself, and also knowing what I'm saying yes and what I'm saying no to, and being clear with that and being accountable for that as well.
And you mentioned community building, and I know that's a word which is often bounded around, especially in the third sector or government policy, etc. But could you let us know, what how have you seen community being built through the work of a Band of Brothers? Or what does it mean to build community, and how does one go about that?
I think one of the key elements to building community is a pivotal or an initiatory experience. So I think that the work that we do in a Band of Brothers, it wouldn't be possible without the rites of passage experience, because there's something fundamentally, certainly in my experience, and I witness it in others, there's a bonding element where we say things like standing in the fire with another man wherever he's wherever he's at, to stand with him. Okay, that requires certain specific circumstances.
And what do you mean by stand with him where he's at? Because some people listening could go, "What you mean, like over by the tree?" Or
Yeah, yeah, thank you. I guess more sort of in terms of emotional world, in terms of perhaps challenges, perhaps being his authentic self is not easy. It's not easy to be authentic, and I think it's to have support in being authentic is a significant piece. And I think in order to fully support a man in his authenticity, then you kind of need to go wherever he is with him.
Okay.
So if that's in a state of distress, or if he's feeling anger, or if he's feeling grief, to be able to stand alongside him and not want to drag him out of that, not rescue, not try and fix anything, but just to be with. That can be enormously powerful.
Yeah. So are these like necessary or parts of initiation? So emotions or distress and or seeking authenticity. Is that part, or is that the reason for initiation? What's the connection there?
I think that getting in touch with oneself, because this is about relationship, right? Relationship with self, relationship to other, relationship to community. And I think in order to get in touch with oneself, I think as a human species, we want to avoid pain and discomfort largely, and that can take us to not so good places. That can take us into the realm of addiction or avoidance. And I think when to the point of collapse or destruction. And I think that in order to get in contact with that authenticity, we have to navigate some treacherous ground often. And I think that's the courage of to be with oneself. That treacherous ground needs to be covered, and we can't do it on our own.
Yeah. So are you talking about, when you say treacherous, are you talking about being reminded or going to places that we'd rather forget about or wish it hadn't happened, or that might be very uncomfortable for us to sort of talk about?
Yeah.
Yeah. So is that what an initiation is, talking about those sort of things? Is that...
I think it's part of it. And this isn't something that just happens overnight. This is a process, and it's an ongoing process. That's certainly been my experience, and what I see in others is this is an ongoing process. It's not something that you do and then it's done. I think that all people suffer wounds. It's inevitable. And I think how we tend to our wounds, and I think the breakdown of community is problematic, because in a healthy community that we can tend to each other's wounds in a way that when you're on your own, that's not possible. Which is why community is so important, and why group work is so important.
So there's something about coming together with others and not being alone with that which troubles us, and somehow sort of working through that or resolving that, and which paves the way towards being more authentic and more able to connect with yourself and others. Is that?
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah. I think getting in touch with the those broken parts and being able to reintegrate, bring them back home. We have the homecoming event. It's less kind of bringing those parts home, being more rounded and complete as individuals, all the aspects.
Gotcha.
It's not about getting rid of the discomfort or the uncomfortable stuff. It's about bringing it into light and processing and experiencing and kind of navigating through something in order to gain a greater sense of completeness. We might be dented, but we're complete or more complete. And that's ongoing because life continues.
Yeah, okay. And the dents, we continue to be dented.
Absolutely, yeah.
Gotcha.
The shit keeps flying. And the more stability we can have, the more we can manage when the shit hits.
So something about building more resolve and more resilience to what life can throw at us. Yeah. I know something you were saying before, just trying to remember what it was. Oh yeah, that was it. Just as you were sort of giving a summary of initiation and some of the parts and getting people, it sounded like it was getting people ready to be in relationship, to be in community. And it just sounded like a really focused way of nurturing others or nurturing individuals to I guess feel more comfortable about, feel better about themselves and better about being in relationship with others.
I think it's about building enough trust to begin to bring one's authenticity as a group of, as in this case, a group of men. That is permission giving. When someone shares authentically, you feel that, and that gives permission for the next man. Do you know what? I got the same thing, or whatever it might be.
Good, so it's like a knock-on or a ripple effect around the room.
Absolutely.
And before you know it, what it sounds like what happens is you've got a whole room of people who are feeling progressively more able to be themselves, and the ease or, I guess, connection that might come from that. Yeah. So I'd just like to steer the conversation to, you mentioned that you're a therapist, and I'm just really interested, I know I'm a therapist myself, but I'm really interested in hearing from you. What is the point of therapy?
Good question. I guess it would be different for every individual.
What do you think?
I think the point, again, I'm going to come back to something about being witnessed in an authentic state, and it requires a lot of, we talk about a container, a therapeutic relationship. It requires a lot in order for someone to emerge, as it were. And everyone will have different needs, and will have different reasons for going to therapy. But there's an element of reparation.
Gotcha. And that's something you're able to offer as a therapist when someone walks in the door?
Often.
Yeah. Okay.
Not always.
So there's no guarantees?
No, not at all.
Yeah. Okay.
And it's a relationship. It's a dance, if you will. And often it can be a beautiful dance. It can be a rough dance. It can be or the dance might not happen.
Okay. Yeah. So what would it look like if the dance was a rough one? I'm just thinking like people who might be looking in, who might be therapists themselves, or they might be seeking therapy, and they might be going, "Oh, what a rough." What could that look like?
I often say, one of the things I sometimes say to clients, because some people come for therapy for different reasons. Okay, some people come to therapy because they want to face their demons. Other people come because they want to be looked after. Other people come for any number of reasons because they're desperate. And I often say to people, and it's a I talk about the dance of this sort of balance between compassion and challenge.
Gotcha.
And for everyone, it's different. And I think the rough ride can be where it's difficult. It's difficult. It can be painful. I often say, are you willing to get your hands dirty?
Gotcha. Okay. So you're talking about it when it comes down to it. Yeah, there's caring and there's compassion, but I guess they're coming to you to change things or for things to be different, and that's not always an easy undertaking. Yeah.
No,
Okay.
it's not. And people will access on different levels.
Yeah.
And some people are very good at. Everyone's different, and people, and it might sound obvious. Everyone's different, like really, really different. People perceive the world in different ways. People show up in different ways. It never ceases to amaze me how different people are.
Gotcha. Yeah. So bearing that in mind, then how does that inform you in your therapeutic practice?
I'm a champion of people. I believe in people. I believe in hope. So that's kind of my starting point. It's really, again, it comes down to paying attention and listening to people. And part of my training's been in person centered to trust that the person that's sitting in that chair knows best. They know. I can ask the questions and be with them as they dig deeper and deeper and answer the questions. They know what they need more than I do. I can have some ideas. But often it's important for me to get out of the way.
Sure. But what would you say to someone who was, like, say, heavily addicted to drugs, and they it's clearly destroying their lives, and they still think it's good for them to continue? I mean,
it happens.
For some people, go like, that doesn't make sense. Taking drugs destroys, and
I believe in autonomy. I believe if someone sits in the chair and I say, let's say they're addicted to drugs, and I might say, okay, so, where do you want to be in 5 years? Let's have a look. If you continue on the trajectory you're on, what might that look like in 5 years? Or if you were to make some changes, what might that look like in 5 years? And some people say, they're so, you said, some people might want things to be different. Other people want things to be the same, but less painful. And some people don't want to stop taking drugs.
gotcha.
And that's up to them. It's not my job to be convincing anyone. I just ask the questions.
Gotcha. Yeah.
As hard as that may be. Because it would be a short-lived career if it was any different.
Because I can imagine that people might show up actually wanting to be told what to do, or wanting answers rather than being helped after.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
People that after several weeks will say, I thought I was going to come here and you were going to tell me what to do. It doesn't work like that, does it? And it can take weeks to get to that point. And that's quite that in itself, that moment of realization is absolutely key. This is this is the responsibility. We often say, wherever you find yourself in life, it may or may not be your fault. However, what happens next is your responsibility. And a lot of people don't want to hear that.
Why do you think that is?
Because it's tough. It's a tough gig.
And is that something around when someone realizes it's on them and it's not going to be handed to them, or there's going to take something from them, or what's the toughness?
I think it's, again, we can go back to rites of passage. We can talk about this transition from childhood into adulthood, which of course is always ongoing to some extent. However, it's that point, that turning point where, I want to be parented. Yeah. And as adults, there are a lot of adults that want to be parented. I think there's always an element of every individual that wants to be parented. But it's like, if that part of us is in the driving seat, it's a total car crash.
What if the parent part of ourselves is?
No, if that part of us that wants to be parented,
Oh, I see. Gotcha.
is in the driver's seat, and it's this reality, we need to put that down and say, no, actually, this is on me, and I have the capacity to do this. I have the support. I do have what is required to show up for myself, and to attend to what I need to attend to move forward in my life. That can be enormously empowering, and it's challenging.
And it's making more sense to me now around what you said around helping people to take responsibility, and what you're doing there is actually, that's what you're doing. What you believe in people.
Yeah, I
So
do.
you believe in their resources. So it's like, well, I don't need to rescue you because I truly believe that together that we can help you find out how you can change this around.
So in transactional analysis, Eric Byrne, who was the founder of TA, he talked a lot about physis, and physis is this kind of this life force, this spark of life, and in different cultures, as reference to this kind of this innate capacity for growth. And really, it's about recognizing that in people. And it's about tending to a garden, right? So if a plant in a garden requires some sunlight, requires some water, requires some space, and there is a capacity for flourishing, right? But if it's covered in weeds, or it's baking dry, if those nutrients aren't in place, or there's a deficit, or it's been deprived in some way, the plant will struggle and wither and die. And it's that so it's that innate life force. Carl Rogers talks about self-actualization, this capacity to flourish given the right conditions. So I believe in that.
Gotcha.
And it's tough, given the culture we live in.
And if you were to sum up like the relevance of the culture that we live in, I mean, I'm sort of sitting here thinking, is that to do with like people blaming others or saying it's up to others to do that, or what do you mean by that?
I think life is complicated. I think people are complicated. I think that once communities get bigger than a certain number of people, this is a big topic. I think that in order to stay connected, we need, in order to have an element of healthy attachment, to feel a sense of okayness in ourselves, then we can show up in our community. If we don't have that sense of okayness, and we're trying to get our needs met, perhaps in unhealthy ways, things get messy pretty quickly. And I think things are pretty messy right now.
Yeah. And was there ever a time in your life when things were messy?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
For sure.
And how was that, was that a part of, was that a useful experience for you to have, or how useful was that?
I would say I was very lucky. I grew up in a loving family, and was far from perfect, and there was dysfunction, and however, there was love and there was security, and I think that served me well. So when I went out into the world and navigated it, trying to find my way, and was, blaming everybody for everything, and finding myself in, using alcohol. Yeah, things were messy. And I think it's appropriate for there to be some messiness. It's like, when the particularly for young men, leaving home, going out into the world, you're going to run headlong into brick walls, right? And that's normal. It's the capacity to whether we can stand up again and go, wow, okay, that hurt. I'm not going to do that again. Or if there is enough, so again, in TA terms, if there's enough available adult, if there's enough sense of okayness, a strong enough sense of self, then there's resilience, there's learning, there's a capacity to navigate forward. If there isn't enough available adult, if there is not that healthy attachment in infancy, if there's not that groundedness, as it were, then I'd say that's almost impossible. And that's where kind of community comes in, and where there's a reparative element to community, that in a way we can recreate what the needs that we can provide, and that together we can provide the needs that weren't met in infancy. So we can begin to learn to do things in a different way, and we can learn, it's never too late. It's never too late to develop a healthier sense of self. If that's making sense.
Yeah, that does make sense. Yeah. No. So, who have been have there been any pivotal people, or maybe even a book, or people you've met in person that have sort of significantly helped you to be where you are today?
Yeah, there are. So in 1994, I was living in Ireland, and within the space of a few months, I read M. Scott Peck, The Road Less Travelled, which, it was written in the 70s. It's definitely of its time. However, let's not throw it under the bus. There's a lot of, it had a big impact on me. That's the point is, it had a big impact on me. And I picked up this hitchhiker, and this is so interesting. It was in Ireland, and he was visiting, I can't remember what it was. It was some place in Ireland that he's always wanted to visit. And we got chatting, and I put him up for the night, and we kind of sat up, and he kind of told me about himself. And he said that he used to work in the city. He was invited over to Romania to work in an orphanage, to volunteer in an orphanage, which he did. It had a profound effect on him. And when he came back to the UK, he sacked his job off, and he wrote a list of 50 things he wanted to do before he died. And he went about ticking those off one by one in a way that was possible and for him. And one of those things was visiting this place in Ireland. So he was kind of doing this, and this conversation really, really hit home for me. That was in 1994. And then in 1998, somebody said to me, do you want to come to Romania and volunteer in an orphanage? Which I did. And I had, I would say, a similar experience, very profound, very moving experience. So they kind of, those things tie in nicely.
Well, what changed for you? Like, with the book and with meeting the hitchhiker and then volunteering at the orphanage in Romania, what was it to change, or what was?
Yeah, it was, I think, again, it alludes back to this notion of, I'd felt hard done by. I was kind of like, I was anti a lot of stuff. I was kind of like, I'd opted out of society, and I was reaction. It was all reaction. And this was an opportunity to do something like constructive, proactive, and to put, my money where my mouth was, so to speak. And
so was that the message that Peck was conveying in his book, Road Less Travelled?
Ultimately, his message was take responsibility.
Yeah.
That was that's I think that's the bottom line. And time is short, and do with it what you will. The clock's ticking. Yeah.
And from the hitchhiker, what was it that changed after picking him up and hearing about his story and his sounded like a bucket list? And
He just stuck in my mind. He went off the next morning, and I gave him Siddhartha by Hermann Hesse, which is a book that was very impactful on me as well. I gave him that book, and off he went on his way. And who knows whether he ever reflects back to, I don't even know what his name was, if whether he reflects back to that time or not. But in hindsight, as I look back, it was like, do you know what? That was pivotal. That was a pivotal experience. I met someone, he modelled something to me.
And what did he model?
He modelled that he was living life on his terms, in his way, that he wasn't wasting his time, that life was valuable, that he had a spirit of adventure, courage, and something that those things spoke to me as a young man, looking, searching, as I always had done, and continue to. It was like, yeah, that meant something to me.
And what did you get from the time in Romania volunteering there?
That's a big chapter for me. What did I get from it? I guess really we talk about community. I was really looked after by the family that I stayed with. Really looked after. They genuinely, and just in general, there was a real, it wasn't a, so the town was Zalău in Romania, so it wasn't a tourist destination. It was a medium-sized town. It was rough. It was, it was in 1998. It was a real experience for me. I hadn't experienced that before. There was poverty, however, in terms of the culture and in terms of the community and in terms of the family, and in terms of the connectedness and the generosity and the compassion, it was a wealth of it was a wealthy, in that respect, it was certainly a wealthy experience for me.
It sounds like you got to experience something there which you hadn't experienced in the same way back home, or part of your upbringing, or witnessed something there in a family structure.
Yeah.
What was that?
It was unconditional. It really felt like it was, it was a different context. It was it was stronger sense of community. Like I say, I grew up in a loving home, but it was quite small and contained, and it didn't really spill out particularly into the neighbouring streets, or it's different cultures, and it's a real appreciation for, when I got back to the UK, I couldn't believe how clean it was.
How clean the UK was.
Absolutely. I was absolutely, when I remember getting off the plane and just seeing how flat the roads were, and how the curbs were at right angles, and and there were pavements, and that there was a sense of order that had been by orchestration. It really hit me, and I thought, wow, I'm really lucky to be to live where I lived, and in certain respects.
Mm-hmm. So you came back after your time in Romania with like seeing this country with a different set of eyes, or in a different sort of way.
Yeah, very much so.
Yeah.
A lot of gratitude.
And gratitude, yeah. And you said with certain, there were some things you didn't appreciate about home.
Swings and roundabouts. I mean, and really it wasn't even a cognitive thing. It was more an emotional thing. I mean, I cried like a baby when I left Romania. The family that had taken me in, they worked at the orphanage. When I came to say goodbye, I was very emotional. So it wasn't a cognitive thing. It was just something that absolutely just, I was deeply moved. So in that respect, so it's like I say, it swings and roundabouts. There every country and every culture will have its upside and its downside.
Yeah. And if they were listening in onto this podcast, this video cast, what is there something you'd like to say to them? If they could hear.
So Ulrika and Florin and I'm sorry, I've forgotten the other name. Thank you, really. Thank you. I mean, I've said it many times, and we're friends on Facebook. And it was so natural. It seemed to come so natural. The generosity and the hospitality. So I'm eternally grateful, and never forget it.
And it sounds like that's something you've taken into your life since that experience. Yeah. So how are you as a host?
That's a good point. I think I'm all right as a host. I think on a more one-to-one, I'm not a big fan of groups of people particularly. But in terms of, if I have a guest at my house, I'll look after them and make sure they got what they need, and that hospitality. And I really noticed the absence of that hospitality when I got back to the UK, and people sort of saying, "Oh, where the kettle is," or just so there was a bit of a deficit in real authentic hospitality. So I noticed that. Yeah, I think I'm a good host, good enough.
And you mentioned there around not particularly liking groups or liking more sort of a one-to-one or perhaps smaller groups. And yet I've also heard you speak around a real passion for facilitating groups. So what's the difference there, Nick? How so?
I like to be someone. I love, I do a lot of circle work in a band of brothers. I'm a member of a book group. There's something, and a lot of my therapeutic work as well. I enjoy creating and being part of a healthy container.
Could you explain for those who are listening, like, well, what's a container? Because a lot of people would think about ice cream and the freezer and stuff like that. So,
what's a container? A container is a mindfully created space which has certain conditions to it. So perhaps some certain agreements put into place. So maybe about confidentiality, around sobriety. And a container is an environment that wants to contain. So, in terms of, I have a bit of a reputation for it, but in a band of brothers, if a man turns up a few minutes late, for me, the man needs the consent of the circle to join.
it sounds like they definitely need a consent from you.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's appropriate. I think the danger is that, so if, for instance, if we're doing a check-in and we've begun the check-ins, for a man to then join the circle punctures something. It punctures the formation of something, and there might be a good reason, and that's what I think it needs to be considered. So the container is an agreed space that not only exists in that moment in time, but also is that container is cultivated over consistent meetings.
Yeah. So something about honouring agreements that have been made in that group, and something about when they're held, then something remains intact. But if they're sort of broken or contravened, then there's some leakage or, a feeling of safety, and I guess perhaps respect as well around why we're here and what we've agreed to do.
Yeah. And it's a collective experience, and it's a container is it's difficult to describe and some containers are stronger than others, and like you say, sometimes there's leakage. But I would say, certainly for me, I know when I'm in a healthy container, and I know when I'm not.
Gotcha. Yeah. And just sort of going back to, because I imagine there's a tension there, where it seems to me like there's a sort of paradox, comfortable, preferring smaller groups or individual or one-on-ones, and also you work around facilitating groups. And I know you mentioned about Band of Brothers, and I know you do that in other spaces as well. So how do you reconcile that?
I think it's a good question. It comes back to the container. I think that so it's easier on a one-to-one level. It's easier to create a container of trust and a container that will allow a level of depth. Because without a container, there's no descent. It's like it's like the well. You need the walls of the well in order to go down into the earth, to the water.
So what you're talking about here is when you're coming together for some, whether sort of therapeutic or transformative, or something that's happening that may help people be more authentic, or work through some of the stuff, or increase some of the okayness that you spoke about before. Is that what you mean here?
Yes, that it's not possible. The container I would say, is a requirement, or the quality of the container there will be a correlation between the quality of the work and the quality of the container. So the stronger the container, the more it can hold, quite literally. And if the container is weak or has holes in it, then there'll be leakage and it will lose potency, if that makes sense.
So as a facilitator of groups, what's important, and how do you maintain, that robustness, or a container which is going to sort of help what's about to happen?
Well, I would say it's a collective effort. The container is made up of every person that's in that circle, and I guess a facilitator's job is to model something, to model a sense of balance, that there's compassion, and there's compassion, there's fluidity, there's room for movement, and there is robustness and firmness to hold things in place, and both are important. And if you go too far and wander, so if you imagine, who was it? Was it Bruce Lee that said something like the purpose of the bucket is to hold water, so that if you go too far one way, if it's just robustness and firmness, it becomes tyrannical, and if it's all fluidity and compassion, it becomes too soft. It becomes a puddle on the floor. Both things are required. So, we can imagine the yin yang symbol. Both things are required in order to create a healthy environment.
So there are hundreds and hundreds of therapists out there, and what advice would you give to people who are looking for a therapist? Like, where should they begin?
You're absolutely right. There are a lot of therapists out there. I often equate therapists to maybe like mechanics or chefs. There's a lot of people that specialize in a lot of different things. Some people are good at what they do, others not so. So it's a real, I would say, try it out. Trust your intuition, trust your gut, get really clear on what it is that you want. And I appreciate that's not necessarily that easy, and that may come over time. Notice how you respond if you look at somebody's photo or website. Notice what goes on in your body, whether you're drawn to that person. try not to overthink it, take a risk,
Yeah.
show up. That's the most important thing, is to take the step.
And why would, what do you offer? Why would anyone come to you if they're considering a therapist? What is it that you offer that sets you apart, if anything, from the hordes of therapists that are out there?
So I'm quite a serious therapist. I'm quite serious, and he said with a big smile.
So what's going on there then?
Because again, it's a balance, right? It's a balance of being robust and being able to challenge, but also being deeply compassionate and connected. And both things are important. And I think, again, that's important in a therapist, that they have the capacity to move, to lean into whatever is required at any given moment. And I would say that's quite a skill set, A, to be in tune with that, and B, to be able to deliver that. I think that for me, it's a serious business. Life is a serious business, and it needs to be met with some gravitas and some potency, because it's a serious business. And I think a lot of people are more inclined to trust. Again, it depends what people want. Somebody described me the other day as reassuringly serious, which I thought was I thought, yeah, I love that. I'll take that.
Okay, yeah. And do you specialize as a particular sort of client or person where you have a particular sort of offering that would suit them?
I find myself working with a lot of men. I work with women as well. And I think there is something in there. Again, I go back to when I did my initiation, my rites of passage. I relate to being a man. I relate to how it was for me as a young man, and this sort of notion of showing up for myself in some way. And I think that kind of transfers into the room sometimes. So I haven't designed it that way, but I get a lot of referrals from men, young and older, and women as well. But I find myself working with a lot of men. I don't know what you'd have to ask them, really, what I offer that other therapists don't. I mean, every dynamic is different. Every therapist and every therapeutic relationship will be different. Even for every time it's different, and the needs will be different, the work will be different, the outcomes will be different. So it's a writhing beast.
Okay. And I guess what you're referring to there is you available as a therapist, and the encounters you have or may not have or get close to having. It sounds like you're talking about something that works between you and others and may coalesce in a therapeutic relationship and actually some client work, or is that?
I'm not sure I follow.
Yeah, what do you mean then by when you talk about writhing beast?
It's a living, it's a live dynamic.
Yeah.
I describe it as a writhing beast, as sort of a bit tongue in cheek, but it's kind of like riding the bucking bronco. It's not, if therapy is a kind of a plain sailing. Sometimes it might be, but generally speaking, if it's too easy, it's there's good reason for that. By its very nature, that therapy is difficult.
Okay.
Often.
So what I'm hearing is that the way that you work is actually there's a necessary part of uncomfortableness or tension in there that is sort of related to the challenge or the growth that is happening.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, you can roll out the old cliches, no pain, no gain. It's difficult if whether it's coming to terms with something, whether it's wanting something to change, it's it's life is a tough gig, and I think and I think for me, certainly for me, coming to that realization that life is a tough gig. I spent years like being angry that it was a tough gig because I thought it shouldn't be a tough gig, or I wanted an easy gig, and it was actually coming to terms with the fact that life's difficult, and why wouldn't it not be? Why would it not be? And it's not necessarily somebody else's fault, or it's not necessarily my fault, or how do I navigate this? And I think acceptance is gold dust. Your capacity to accept things as they are. The old 12-step adage, is it? The wisdom to know the difference, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to accept the things, whatever it is. I can't remember how it is now, but it's acceptance is key.
What's been your toughest gig, Nick?
My toughest gig has probably been witness the decline and death of my father.
And what did that require of you, Nick?
It required from me resilience. That my dad was ill for a long time, 14 years. From diagnosis of dementia to his death. It required a resilience that I didn't know that I had. I didn't have a choice. My agreement was that I would stand by my dad's side always, and for most of my life that was relatively easy, but for the last 14 years it was not easy. But the agreement was there. There was no. It felt like there was no. I mean, there was choice, but it felt like there wasn't, and rightly so. And I was good with that. I was good with that. So it took me to places that that I hadn't been to before, that I didn't know that I could cope with, and yeah, that's been my toughest gig.
Sounds like one hell of a journey.
Mm.
Yeah. And I'm assuming there, when you said that was the agreement I made, is that again between a part of you that wants to take responsibility and the other part which just wants to, yeah.
And there's limits. We talk about the container, or the there are limits to what can be withstood, and that's why I believe in people. I believe in people's resilience and people's capacity to hold, to carry weight. I believe in that, and I think it's remarkable. I think human beings are remarkable in what we can withstand and what we can hold. Yeah.
And what part did your father play in helping you to carry weight, or help you carry the the things in life that need holding? I guess essentially it's like, what part did your father play in the man you are today?
Mm.
And I say that just in the context of, it seems to me that the role of the father is often not in place. He's absent for one reason or another, or doesn't have access, whichever way you want to look at it. And so.
I mean, I could talk about my dad. Like I say, my dad was a mixed bag. He in terms of he was a community man. He was a GP. He was a community GP. He would, he back in the days, he was a GP in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, and he'd do home visits. He knew the families. He knew their health. A far cry from how it is now. But he was a community man. And he was very loyal. I definitely inherited a sense of loyalty from him, a sense of, passionate about community. I also inherited, and it's interesting because, often in a band of brothers, when we talk about ancestors and we talk about the kind of, they say, it's a saying that, when you do your work, you're in service to certainly to the future generations, but also to the past generations. That there's some ancestral healing that can take place, and I often I bring my dad in, so to speak, because he, he isolated himself a lot. He wasn't big on friendships or he had a tendency to isolate himself and certainly to emotionally isolate himself. And there's something about bringing him in to witness the work, so my work, but our work, the community's work in a band of brothers, that it's enormously healing. And I sort of, I want some of that to rub off on him in some way. It might sound strange, but I believe that on some level he receives something. There's a ripple effect, and he receives something from it.
Even now.
Yeah. For sure.
Yeah. Thank you, Nick. Yeah. And it was a couple of weeks ago, or it might have been this week, we spoke about the impending, you'd agreed to come here. And you spoke about some concerns of, one, you were clear, it's a good opportunity for you to get your, get your thoughts in order and to express yourself. But there was some trepidation around how this might impact on your job as a therapist. That, some clients might see it, or something like that. What was going on there?
Yeah, I think as in any good therapist will be aware of their professional conduct, their professional boundaries, and it may or may not be useful. I mean, to go down the line that you just said, if some of my clients were to watch this video now, that may or may not be useful for the therapeutic work.
For them to witness you here.
Sure.
Because?
Because I've revealed a lot of some more personal stuff. And I think that in order for therapeutic work to have depth, I believe there is an element of how best to describe it, professional boundaries. I think they need to be in place. It's not a friendship, it's not a personal friendship. We could relate to this in a band of brothers, that standing alongside men, it's like, we're not friends, so to speak. We're more, colleagues or participants, or, there's a depth that we on some level we might know each other at great depth, which would be true in the therapeutic space. But however, we're not friends.
So there's something around about that if a client were to witness or to listen in on this podcast today and either be a past, current or future client of yours, that may lead to the idea that they'll be friends with you, or what do you mean?
No, yeah. I think that not necessarily. I think it would colour the work. I think it would colour the work.
So complicate it in a way?
Potentially. Yeah.
Okay.
And I think in terms of, it has happened before. I've worked with people that, for several months, and there might be a moment of realization, and it might be, and someone might say to me, we're never going to be friends, are we? Because there's a deep yearning for connection. It's a paradoxical business, that there's a deep, people have deep yearning for connection, And in a therapeutic container, that connection is possible. However, it's a therapy. It takes place in a certain context.
Okay. So that something here could add material to or knowledge for the client that may complicate or may need to be worked out to sort of re-establish boundaries or quality of relationship or something. Okay.
Yeah.
So you've taken a risk today by coming on
Yeah,
here.
for sure. Yeah, yeah. I have. And, and some, and it's different for everyone. I'm a big, I've got a lot of respect for Irvin Yalom, American psychotherapist who's been practicing for, I think now he's certainly in his 80s. He might even be in his 90s. But for decades of therapeutic work, he's written numerous books, and we talk about in training we talk about self-disclosure. When is it appropriate? So only self-disclose if it's in service to the therapeutic work. Okay. Yeah, and Yalom says, disclose everything. Always, just don't hold back.
Because
because he's got the experience to do that. Yeah.
What's to disclose everything about himself?
Yeah, or not to disclose everything, but not to disclose.
So if it comes up in a relationship, is to mention it.
Yeah.
Okay.
So which is one end of the spectrum. Whereas if you take someone more like the psychodynamic school, their boundaries are rock solid, and there's nothing. The therapist gives nothing away of themselves on a personal level.
So being here today, it would seem, is part of you moving slightly more towards Irving Yalom and away from the psychodynamic. Would that be a fair?
Part of that, yeah, perhaps.
So why have you come on today, knowing that it could complicate or could perhaps even compromise or certainly make, add burden, if you like, to establishing a therapeutic quality relationship?
Because I could look on a sort of microcosmic level of why I did my rites of passage weekend was because it wasn't okay for me not to. It's like the thought of me saying, do you know what, James? Oh, the risks are too high, and I don't want to do the podcast. It's just that wouldn't be appropriate. The appropriate is meet the challenge, and navigate it, and learn from it, and continue to live courageously. And not to, to give it due consideration and to take the steps required.
And now that you've done that, how has it been?
I am enjoying, and I have really enjoyed this conversation. I'm curious, again, this is really useful for me to sort of, I knew you'd ask me good questions, to get that, to be able to articulate my own thoughts and my own feelings. It helps me to make sense of myself more, to kind of process, what is important to me? What do I think about that? What is that like? What was that like? To venture across the landscape.
And is there anything that you've learnt about yourself today?
I'm comfortable. It's good to talk. It's good to share. I know I love that. As part of why I do what I do. Like I say, I'm a big fan of people, and I never was particularly a big fan of people. I'd always kind of hide away from people. And I love people. I love people deeply, and I'm no different to anyone else in that terms of yearning for connection. And I got a real taste for it now.
Sounds like there's no stopping you now.
Yeah.
And I know, is there anything that you'd like to mention, stuff that you're interested in or putting out in the world that you'd like to let people know about? You haven't written your book yet. If you were going to write a book, Nick, what do you think it would be on?
Well, this has come up through several junctures in my life. People have said, "Oh, you should write a book." I don't know. It's too big for me. It's too big. Part of the reason I like to formulate and make sense of myself and my thinking is because, like I said earlier on, there was a question, I can't remember what it was. Oh, yeah, who am I? Right? It's such a big question. Like often, I find myself, it's too big, so I don't know what I'd write about. I could write about, I could write about my life as a DJ. I could write about my life, I could write a lot. I could write about my life as a therapist, or all my sort of teens and 20s, about music, many things. But do you know what? I'm not a fan of writing. I'd much prefer to speak. I need a ghostwriter.
Okay. Is there anyone out there?
Yeah, that's what. Yeah, anyone wants to ghostwrite my a book, then get in touch.
And how can people get in touch with you? We're going to put your contacts in the. Okay.
Yeah, people can get in contact with me. I'm in the middle of revamping my website, nickcarlingcounselling.com. Just drop me a line.
Yeah, good stuff. Thank you. Yeah. Okay, well, thanks for. Okay, to draw things to a close.
Yeah.
Anything on a tip of your tongue that you'd like to, that's got left unsaid that you'd like to say?
No, just my therapeutic voice just come in there and said, endings are important. That we move towards the end now, and it's important to mark that. Yeah. That's what we're doing now, and I think that, who was it? There was an Indian, I can't remember her name, it was a TA lady, and she spoke about the importance of endings. I can't remember what she said. There was a really nice quote about, it takes a lot of maturity to end well. And, she was talking about, she was on her deathbed. It takes a lot of maturity to end well. And I really, really get that. I really get that, because there's, there can be pain in ending.
Okay. So if we were to end now and summon as much maturity as we can, what would that look like?
That would look like some appreciation. Thank you for inviting me on. Some appreciation for the connection that we've had, that I feel in this conversation, and a really an acknowledgement of your capacity to ask good questions and to follow those questions, to follow the answers, and to descend into conversation, rather than flit across the surface. So I really appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you, Nick. And I've thoroughly enjoyed my time with you today. At times, it's sort of audio apparatus around us just sort of disappeared.
Yeah.
And I enjoyed hearing your voice. I really appreciated the time and care that you have taken to give considered and real, authentic answers. And I know that you've taken a risk today in coming on the podcast, and I really appreciate you doing that. And thanks, Nick.
Great. Thanks, James.
Thank you too.